Y'all, when this news hit my smart news app, I was literally gobsmacked. Who do we have in the government? I remember it used to be a running joke about letting a woman have nuclear codes, but this is who we have running government. I've said before that Trump shouldn't be running a turnkey lemonade stand, and obviously his supporting cast shouldn't be running anything either. This writer from The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, said, "The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans." U.S. national security leaders included me in a group chat about upcoming military strikes in Yemen. I didn't think it could be real. Then the bombs started falling. These people are literally the opposite of smart. They shouldn't be trusted with anything. They shouldn't be trusted with your locker code or whatever. They shouldn't get anything secret. What is wrong with these people? Who have y'all, MAGA people? Who have y'all voted in? So the Atlantic article is behind a paywall. So this person down here says, someone who forgot to cancel their subscription, please provide the archive link or screenshots. Yay, and they did. Okay, so I already showed the front page. Let's jump into the article. It says, the world found out shortly before 2 p.m. Eastern on March 15th that the United States was bombing Houthi targets across Yemen. I, however, knew 2 hours before the first bombs exploded that the attack might be coming. The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. The plan included precise information about weapons packages, targets, and timing. This is going to require some explaining. The story technically begins shortly after the Hamas invasion of southern Israel in October 2023. The Houthis, an Iran-backed terrorist organization whose motto is "God is great, death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam," soon launched attacks on Israel and on international shipping, creating havoc for global trade. Throughout 2024, the Biden administration was ineffective in countering these Houthi attacks. The incoming Trump administration promised a tougher response. This is where Pete Hegseth and I come in. On Tuesday, March 11th, I received a connection request on Signal from a user identified as Michael Watts. Signal is an open-source encrypted messaging service popular with journalists and others who seek more privacy than other text messaging services are capable of delivering. I assumed that the Michael Watts in question was Donald Trump's national security advisor. I did not assume, however, that the request was from the actual Michael Watts. I have met him in the past, and though I didn't find it particularly strange that he might be reaching out to me, I did think it's somewhat unusual, given the Trump administration's contentious relationship with journalists and Trump's periodic fixation on me specifically. It immediately crossed my mind that someone could be masquerading as Watts in order to somehow entrap me. It is not at all uncommon these days for nefarious actors to try to induce journalists to share information that could be used against them. I accepted the connection request, hoping that this was the actual national security advisor and that he wanted to chat about Ukraine or Iran or some other important matter. 2 days later, Thursday at 4:28 p.m., I received a notice that I was to be included in a Signal chat group. It was called the Houthi PC Small Group. A message to the group from Michael Watts reads as follows: Team, establishing a principals group for coordination on Houthis, particularly for over the next 72 hours. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a tiger team at deputies/agency chief of staff level, following up from the meeting in the sit room this morning for action items, and will be sending that out later this evening. The message continued: please provide the best staff POC from your team for us to coordinate with over the next couple of days and over the weekend. Thanks. The term Principals Committee generally refers to a group of the senior-most national security officials, including the Secretaries of Defense, State, and the Treasury, as well as the Director of the CIA. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that I have never been invited to a White House Principals Committee meeting, and that in my many years of reporting on national security matters, I had never heard of one being convened over a commercial messaging app. 1 minute later, a person identified only as MAR, the Secretary of State is Marco Antonio Rubio, wrote, might need him for state, apparently designating the current counselor of the State Department as his representative. At that same moment, a Signal user identified as JD Vance wrote, Andy Baker for VP. 1 minute after that, TG, presumably Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence or someone masquerading as her, wrote, Joe Kent for DNI. 9 minutes later, Scott B, apparently Secretary Scott Bessent or someone spoofing his identity, wrote, Dan Katz for Treasury. At 4:53 p.m., a user called Pete Hexet wrote, Dan Caldwell for DOD. And at 6:34 p.m., Brian wrote, Brian McCormack for NSC. One more person responded. John Ratcliffe wrote at 5:24 p.m. with the name of a CIA official to be included in the group. I am not publishing that name because that person is an active intelligence officer. The principals apparently assembled. In all, 18 individuals were listed as members of this group, including various National Security Council officials, Steve Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East and Ukraine negotiator, Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, and someone identified only as SM, which I took to stand for Stephen Miller. I appeared on my own screen as JG. That was the end of the Thursday text chain. After receiving the Wall's text related to the Houthi PC small group, I consulted a number of colleagues. We discussed the possibility that these texts were part of a disinformation campaign initiated by either a foreign intelligence service or more likely a media gadfly organization, the sort of group that attempts to place journalists in embarrassing positions and sometimes succeeds. I had very strong doubts that this text group was real because I could not believe that the national security leadership of the United States would communicate on Signal about imminent war plans. I also could not believe that the national security director to the president would be so reckless as to include the editor of the Atlantic in such discussions with senior U.S. officials up to and including the vice president. The next day, things got even stranger. At 8:05 a.m. on Friday, March 14th, Mike Waltz texted the group, Team, you should have a statement of conclusions with taskings per the president's guidance this morning in your high side inboxes. High side in government parlance refers to classified computer and communication systems. State and DOD, we developed suggesting notification lists for regional allies and partners. Joint Staff is sending this AM a more specific sequence of events in the coming days, and we will work with DOD to ensure COS and OVP and POTUS are briefed. At this point, a fascinating policy discussion commenced. The account labeled JD Vance responded at 8:16. Team, I'm out for the day during an economic event in Michigan, but I think we are making a mistake. Vance was indeed in Michigan that day. The Vance account goes on to state 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. There is a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this, as POTUS said, to send a message. The Vance account then goes on to make a noteworthy statement, considering that the VP has not deviated publicly from Trump's position on virtually any issue. I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself, but there is a strong argument for delaying this a month. Doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc. A person identified in Signal as Joe Kent, Trump's nominee to run the National Counterterrorism, is named Joe Kent, wrote at 8:22. There is nothing time sensitive driving the timeline. We'll have the exact same options in a month. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. This is almost at 10 minutes on my TikTok page. I'm going to make a part 2 because I'm going to read y'all this article because, like I said, it is behind a paywall and y'all going to get all of this. This is going to be part 2 of the Atlantic article, The Trump Administration Accidentally Texts Me Its War Plans by Jeffrey Goldberg. Okay, here we go, part 2. Then at 8:26 a.m., a message landed in my Signal app from the user John Ratcliffe. The message contained information that might be interpreted as related to actual and current intelligence operations. At 8:27, a message arrived from the Pete Hegseth account. VP, I understand your concerns and fully support you raising with POTUS. Important considerations, most of which are tough to know how they play out: economy, Ukraine peace, Gaza, etc. I think the messaging is going to be tough no matter what. Nobody knows who the Houthis are, which is why we would need to stay focused on 1, Biden failed, and 2, Iran funded. The Hegseth message goes on to state, waiting a few weeks or a month does not fundamentally change the calculus. Two immediate risk on waiting. 1, this leaks and we look indecisive. 2, Israel takes an action first, or Gaza ceasefire falls apart and we don't get to start this on our own terms. We can manage both. We are prepared to execute, and if I have final go or a no vote, I believe we should. This is not about the Houthis. I see it as 2 things. 1, restoring freedom of navigation, a core national interest, and 2, reestablish deterrence, which Biden cratered. But we can easily pause, and if we do, I will do all that we can to enforce 100% OPSEC, Operation Security. I welcome other thoughts. A few minutes later, the Michael Waltz account posted a lengthy note about trade figures and the limited capabilities of European navies. Whether it's now or several weeks from now, it will have to be the United States that reopens the shipping lanes. Per the president's request, we are working with DOD and state to determine how to compile the costs associated and levy them on the Europeans. The account, identified as JD Vance, addressed a message at 8:45 to Pete Hegseth. If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again. The administration has argued America's European allies benefit economically from the U.S. Navy's protection of international shipping lanes. The user, identified as Hegseth, responded 3 minutes later. VP, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike is correct. We are the only ones on the planet on our side of the ledger who can do this. Nobody else even close. Question is timing. I feel like now is as good a time as any, given POTUS directive to reopen shipping lanes. I think we should go, but POTUS still remains 24 hours of decision space. Still retains 24 hours of decision space. At this point, the previously silent SM joined the conversation. As I heard it, the president was clear, green light, but we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement. E.g., if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain retracted in return. I just see Stephen Miller just, doing his hands like this. He's such an evil character. All right, now, he gives a screenshot of the text messages right here. More screenshots of text messages. That message from SM, presumably Trump's confidant Stephen Miller, the deputy White House chief of staff, or someone playing Stephen Miller, effectively shut down the conversation. The last text came from Pete Hegseth, who wrote at 9:46 a.m. Agree. After reading this chain, I recognized that this conversation possessed a high degree of verisimilitude. The text, in their word choice and arguments, sounded as if they were written by the people who purportedly sent them, or by a particularly adept AI text generator. I was still concerned that this could be a disinformation operation or a simulation of some sort, and I remain mystified that no one in the group seemed to have noticed my presence. But if it was a hoax, the quality and mimicry and the level of foreign policy insight were impressive. He's still just sitting there reading these text messages like, if they are playing me, can you imagine? It was the next morning, Saturday, March 15th, when this story became truly bizarre. At 11:44 a.m., the account labeled Pete Hegseth posted in Signal a team update. I will not quote from this update or from certain other subsequent texts. The information contained in them, if they had been read by an adversary of the United States, could conceivably have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel, particularly in the broader Middle East, Central Command's area of responsibility. What I will say, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this Signal conversation, is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. The only person to reply to the update from Hegseth was the person identified as the vice president. I will say a prayer for victory, Vance wrote. 2 other users subsequently added prayer emoji. According to the lengthy Hegseth text, the first detonation in Yemen would be felt 2 hours hence at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So I waited in my car in a supermarket parking lot. If the Signal chat was real, I reasoned Houthi targets would soon be bombed. At about 1:55, I checked X and searched Yemen. Explosives were being heard across Sana'a, the capital city. I went back to the Signal channel. At 1:48, Michael Waltz had provided the group an update. Again, I won't quote from this text except to note that he described the operation as an amazing job. A few minutes later, John Ratcliffe wrote, "A good start." Not long after, Waltz responded with 3 emojis, a fist, an American flag, and fire. Others soon joined in, including MAR, who wrote, "Good job, Pete, and your team," and Susie Wiles, who texts, "Kudos to all, most particularly those theater and sitcom. Really great. Really great. God bless." Steve Witkoff responded with 5 emojis, 2 hands praying, a flex bicep, and an American flag. Okay, so y'all, they're just high-fiving each other. Okay, cool. We got that. So here's a screenshot of all of that. On Sunday, Waltz appeared on ABC's This Week and contrasted the strikes with the Biden administration's more hesitant approach. These were not kind of pinprick back and forth, what ultimately proved to be feckless attacks, he said. This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. The Signal chat group, I concluded, was almost certainly real. Having come to this realization, one that seemed nearly impossible only hours before, I removed myself from the Signal group, understanding that this would trigger an automatic notification to the group's creator, Michael Waltz, that I had left. No one in the chat seemed to notice that I was there, and I received no subsequent questions about why I left or, more to the point, who I was. Earlier today, I emailed Waltz and sent him a message on his Signal account. I also wrote to Pete Hegseth, John Ratcliffe, Tulsi Gabbard, and other officials. In an email, I outlined some of my questions. Is the Houthi PC small group a genuine Signal thread? Did they know that I was included in this group? Was I, on the off chance, included on purpose? If not, who did they think I was? Did anyone realize who I was when I was added, or when I removed myself from the group? Do senior Trump administration officials use Signal regularly for sensitive discussions? Do the officials believe that the use of such a channel could endanger American personnel? Brian Hughes, the spokesman for the National Security Council, responded 2 hours later, confirming the veracity of the Signal group. This appears to be an authentic message chain, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain, Hughes wrote. The thread is a demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials. The ongoing success of the Houthi operation demonstrates that there were no threats to troops or national security. William Martin, a spokesperson for Vance, said that despite the impression created by the text, the vice president is fully aligned with the president. The VP's first priority is always making sure that the president's advisors are adequately briefing him on the substance of their internal deliberations, he said. VP Vance unequivocally supports this administration's foreign policy. The president and the VP have had subsequent conversations about this matter and are in complete agreement. This is a very long article, so I'm going to make a part 3 because the 10 minutes on this TikTok video is almost over, and I'm just going to get through it just in case anybody wants to see the full article. This is part 3 of the Atlantic's article, The Trump Administration Accidentally Texted Me Its War Plans. It's a very long article, it's very detailed. I have never seen a breach quite like this. It is not uncommon for national security officials to communicate on Signal, but the app is used primarily for meeting planning and other logistical matters, not for detailed, highly confidential discussions of a pending military action. And, of course, I've never heard of an instance in which a journalist has been invited to such a discussion. Conceivably, Waltz, by coordinating a national security-related action over Signal, may have violated several provisions of the Espionage Act, which governs the handling of national defense information, according to several national security lawyers interviewed by my colleague Shane Harris for this story. Harris asked them to consider a hypothetical scenario in which a senior U.S. official creates a signal thread for the express purpose of sharing information with cabinet officials about an active military operation. He did not show them the actual signal messages or tell them specifically what had occurred. All of these lawyers said that a U.S. official should not establish a signal thread in the first place. Information about an active operation would presumably fit the law's definition of national defense information. The Signal app is not approved by the government for sharing classified information. The government has its own systems for that purpose. If officials want to discuss military activity, they should go into a specifically designed space known as a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF. Or SCIF. Most cabinet-level national security officials have one installed in their home or communicate only on approved government equipment, the lawyer said. Normally, cell phones are not permitted inside a SCIF, which suggests that as these officials were sharing information about an active military operation, they could have been moving around in public. Had they lost their phones or had they been stolen, the potential risk to national security would have been severe. Hegseth, Ratcliffe, and other cabinet-level officials presumably would have the authority to declassify information, and several of the national security lawyers noted that the hypothetical officials on the signal chain might claim that they had declassified the information they shared. But this argument rings hollow. They caution because Signal is not an authorized venue for sharing information of such sensitive nature, regardless of whether it has been stamped top secret or not. There was another potential problem. Waltz set some of the messages in the Signal group to disappear after 1 week and some after 4. That raises questions about whether the officials may have violated federal records law. Text messages about official acts are considered records that should be preserved. Under the records law applicable to the White House and federal agencies, all government employees are prohibited from using electronic messaging applications such as Signal for official business unless those messages are promptly forwarded or copied to an official government account. Jason R. Barron, a professor at the University of Maryland and the former director of litigation at the National Archives and Records Administration, told Harris. Intentional violations of these requirements are a basis for disciplinary action. Additionally, agencies such as the Department of Defense restrict electronic messaging containing classified information to classified government networks and/or networks with government-approved encrypted features, Barron said. Several former U.S. officials told Harris and me that they had used Signal to share unclassified information and discuss routine matters, particularly when traveling overseas without access to U.S. government systems, but they knew never to share classified or sensitive information on the app because their phones could have been hacked by a foreign intelligence service, which would have been able to read the messages on the devices. It is worth noting that Donald Trump, as a candidate for president and as president, repeatedly and vociferously demanded that Hillary Clinton be in prison for using a private email server for official business when she was Secretary of State. It is also worth noting that Trump was indicted in 2023 for mishandling classified documents, but the charges were dropped after his election. Waltz and the other cabinet-level officials were already potentially violating government policy and the law simply by texting one another about the operation. But when Walz added a journalist, presumably by mistake, to his principals committee, he created new security and legal issues. Now the group was transmitting information to someone not authorized to receive it. That is a classic definition of a leak, even if it was unintentional, and even if the recipient of the leak did not actually believe it was a leak until Yemen came under American attack. All along, members of the Signal Group were aware of the need for secrecy and operation security. In his text detailing aspects of the forthcoming attack on Houthi targets, Hexet wrote to the group, which at the time included me, "We are certainly clean on OPSEC." That was long. That was a lot. I know that that was a lot. And if you stuck with me to the end of this, please drop, "That was a lot. My mind is blown." And if you got to the end of this, drop any kind of emoji with some popcorn or something to let me know how you're feeling about this. This is going to be the longest 4 years ever. They are so inept. These people are some idiots. That, like I said at the very beginning in part 1, they should not be running a lemonade stand. I cannot believe that this is where we are. I cannot believe that these people are running our government. Y'all, let me know how you're feeling. Join the conversation. Drop some commentary. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.